I was born in a land far away, under the same fluorescent moon as you. I traveled across green terrains, blue oceans, and white clouds just to reach here. I came to stand beside a golden door. We were tired, we were poor. We stood huddled, the three of us, yearning to breathe free, refused by a country with no prosperity. We stood beside the golden door. But there was a wall, 30 feet tall, a guard, dogs at the ready, weapons trained to kill, and yet I lift my hand to knock. My goal in these short minutes is not to push a political agenda, even though my existence is inherently political. My goal is for you to hear me, to realize, and to use this information to spark dialogue and eventually change. It is very popularly stated that America is a nation of immigrants. This is not true. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the land in which we are gathered here today as a traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki and Wabanaki Confederacy. America has been founded off of the genocide and displacement of indigenous people. Before the Mayflower of 1620, there was the White Line of 1619 that brought the first African slaves to Virginia and initiated the historical disenfranchisement of African and African Americans in the United States. For many Mexican people and indigenous people, they did not cross borders. The borders crossed them. So America has had a very tumultuous relationship with immigration, forced and voluntary. And I could go on and on and on about all the laws and amendments and revisions that they have gone, but I'm here to contextualize the how illegality came about. The concept of illegality was born from nativism, and it has grown up to be a concept that is used and weaponized against migrant populations. This nativism that I'm talking about is this relationship that racism and nationalism have, and how that bond is used to continuously define and redefine the concept of race, ethnicity, and culture in America. But first, we should think about what makes an American, or better yet, what does not make an American. Who gets to define these distinctions? Why do the children of European immigrants get to decide who belongs or who does not belong on these lands? So, citizenship laws, or laws that could easily delineate who is considered American, favored white people until the Civil War. After the Civil War, the 14th Amendment came about in 1868, granting citizenship to those born and naturalized within the United States. This was so that former slaves and their children could be deemed American. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act thrusted citizenship upon Native people when they were citizens of their own nations already. Before the 14th Amendment, immigrants that were neither white nor of African descent, they were solely considered workers. They were racially ineligible to obtain citizenship. So, what does a country do when it creates a legal loophole that could grant these racially ineligible workers a chance at citizenship? It creates laws that delineate who is considered American based on racial biases and restricts immigration patterns of these populations. It began with the Chinese Exclusion Act, slowly progressed to exclude specific European people from being considered American. All the while, Mexican migration at the borders was not seen as a threat because of its circular migration patterns, up until World War II, where a labor force shortage was created, and then Mexican migrants were needed to stabilize the US economy. And this was the birth of the Bracero program. It began in 1942 under the State Department, the Department of Labor, and the Immigration and Naturalization Services. Mexican migrants were promised food, shelter, and a salary of 30 cents an hour for their work. This created a dependency on Mexican migrant labor, which was exploited, where bribery and coercion on American growers became a norm and increased the migration of these Mexican workers. But it also increased the tensions that white workers had in the United States. So, these tensions drove the government to end the Bracero program. But still, the continued migration of these Mexican workers was deemed illegal. This rhetoric of deeming these migrants illegal justified the exploitation of their labor. It was still continued to coerce and to bribe on the American side, and the deeming of Mexican migrant workers as illegal fueled the fire and opened up a channel of how this rhetoric could be aimed at the general public to distance Americans versus others, us versus them. So this rhetoric that is used is very specific. It is pointed, it is purposeful. The media and politics use fear-mongering to make us think a certain way, to see very real human people like me as some foreign, unknown concept, as something inhuman and to be feared. Things like alien are used to dehumanize people. Illegals is used to infer criminality on someone's very existence. Invasions, swarms, waves are used to describe migration patterns of humans. Chain migration instead of the actual family reunification process. Anchor babies instead of US-born children. These words and the framework in which they live in are expertly used to instill fear, to excuse and justify discrimination and exploitation. And it makes the general public, like us, like you, see very real people like me as aliens, something to be feared, and as our deaths and our labor exploited and justified. This rhetoric has also fed into lies and myths surrounding immigrants and immigrant populations and has been exacerbated by politicians and their political agendas. So, let's get into the top 5 myths surrounding immigrants. Myth number 1, most are here illegally. So out of 43 million foreign-born people in the United States, around 44% are naturalized citizens. 27% are legal permanent residents, and 25.5% are undocumented people like I am. Of those 11 million people, 40% came to the US legally on a visa like I did and overstayed that visa. Myth number 2. My family came here legally. Why can't they just get in line and do it the right way? There is no line. There is no right way. The requirements to become a legal citizen or have some legal status in the United States are extensive and racist. So, for example, an H-1B visa holder that is trying to obtain legal status has a minimum wait time of 10 years before they are considered a naturalized citizen. The fees associated with trying to obtain legal status are in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. Every case is different. And if there was a line, we would have many more naturalized citizens, myself included. Number 3, they're taking our jobs. In 2014, it was about 5% of the US civilian workforce was made up of undocumented people. But undocumented people do make up a majority of the agricultural and construction field. And this is because their labor is very easily exploited. The working conditions in which they work under are arduous. They are paid next to nothing. They receive no benefits and are not covered under the safety and the net of worker safety laws. Also, it's in America's convenience to have this labor exploited and it be cheap because that means cheap goods and food for Americans. Myth number 4, my favorite. The bad hombres are bringing crime. So 45 has said before that when Mexico brings its people or sends its people, they are bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. Just a few weeks ago, he said that sanctuary communities released back drug dealers, drug traffickers, and gang members back into our communities. But many studies have shown the complete and utter opposite. Since 1980, immigrant populations have grown and expanded more than triple its size, but overall crime has decreased by more than 40%. It might be a surprise to some, but when immigrants come to the United States, they're more prioritized in finding a job, finding and being reunited with their families, or trying to escape dangerous situations. It's not of the utmost importance for someone trying to not be jailed, to commit a crime and thus be deported. Myth number 5, they don't pay taxes. They're an economic burden. Undocumented immigrants pay taxes every time they buy a taxable good. They also report to property taxes every time they buy or rent an apartment or a house. They contribute more than $11.74 billion in taxes and receive no tax benefits. Undocumented immigrants are also ineligible to apply and receive federal public assistance or aid, such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps. And if they do have some kind of lawful status, they have to wait at least 5 years on US soil to apply for these benefits. So you may be asking, why should I care? I saw a bunch of statistics and laws but why is this important? In this political climate, you need to see me. You need to realize that illegal aliens don't look like scary green monsters. They look like me, a 22-year-old girl from Florida, Uruguay, with parents who gave up everything for her to stand on a stage at one of the most prestigious schools in America. They look like my dad, a hardworking man who has sacrificed being in his children's lives so that they could have everything that he never could. They look like my mom, a fierce woman who lives in a constant state of fear and anxiety so that her family can be safe. They look like Thomas, Federico, Olivia, kids in a mixed status family who don't know if one day their dad won't come home. Illegality is more than a buzzword. I stand before you as an alien in the eyes of many, in the eyes of those who cannot see me, in those that think and hate or don't know the context in which their hate manifests for someone they don't even know. And this is all because I am missing a piece of paper, a series of numbers that will delegate me humanity. It is with this piece of paper that I cannot have privileges that many of you might have. Things like health care, the ability to vote, to work and receive benefits, to be deemed human enough and not alien-like. The tides are changing. You have an undocumented person standing before you, asking you to see her and others like her as whole human beings, to treat her and others like her like whole human beings. I hope that we are able to recognize that the United States has a long history of things like this going on, and we are able to change, but if we're willing to work, it needs to be done now. Thank you.